Market news now. Asian markets were steady this morning with signs of a slowdown in U.S. wages, bolstering hopes that the Federal Reserve could hint at an end to interest rate hikes at its meeting later today. The Fed will announce its rate decision at 9 p.m. South African time, followed by a news conference with Chair Jerome Powell half an hour later. Interest rate markets have priced in a slowdown in the pace of rate hikes, with a 25 basis point hike seen, bringing the Fed funds rate target range between 4.5 and 4.75%. Locally, South African miner Harmony Gold announced that improved metal grades at its underground mines during the second quarter helped it meet production targets and offset the impact of ongoing power cuts in the country and global supply chain disruptions. The company will release their financial results for the half year on March 1st. But to talk to us about the latest when it comes to market dynamics and also what we should be paying attention to when that all-important Fed meeting announcement comes out later today, we are joined by Chantel Marks, who is from F&B Wealth and Investment. Chantel, thank you so much for your time. In the lead up to that FOMC, minutes, as well as that press statement, how is the global market sentiment right now?
Well, global market sentiment doesn't look scary at all, to be honest. I mean, we had steady markets over in Asia today. We had positive markets in the US overnight. And locally, the JSE is quite strong. I think that the market is now thinking that they finally have the Fed's number on this one. We're going to get a 25 basis point hike now. We won't have a dot plot. A dot plot is basically just Fed members saying where they think interest rates are heading in future. But I think that the market seems quite calm at the moment, and it hasn't done that ahead of a Fed announcement in a very long time.
So I mentioned that we've got the press statement, the press announcement coming up probably about half an hour after we actually get to see what the decision is and the minutes of that. But what are you going to be paying attention to when Fed Chair Jerome Powell gets to the podium? What sort of nuances will you be listening to?
So definitely his thinking around the inflation trajectory, whether or not there's sticky inflation or inflation remains sticky or embedded. I think that his commentary around the growth outlook, the possibility of recession is going to be quite interesting. And then, of course, the US jobs market, which has remained quite buoyant. Even though you have these headlines saying that everyone's cutting jobs right now, if you look at the actual jobs data, on a net basis, the US is still adding jobs. Now, one of the things that the Fed will be watching quite closely is what that jobs market does. It would want to see a bit of a tempering of that market, just because high jobs growth and competition for talent generally results in higher wage inflation, and that could be bad for inflation going forward.
Yesterday, we had Vodacom locally releasing their quarterly figures. Given the numbers that they put out, what's your conviction on the local telco sector right now?
So if our telco sector was 100% focused on South Africa, it would make for pretty boring reading, and it will almost be like a utilities type stock. So low growth, lots of cash generation, high yield. But what we're seeing now among the South African listed telecoms, particularly Vodacom and MTN, is that a lot of their growth is being driven outside of South Africa. So for Vodacom, they included 22 days of Vodafone Egypt in those numbers, and I mean just that in itself really boosted the overall growth number. If you look at that market as well, you've got still relatively low mobile penetration, relatively low smartphone penetration, relatively low data penetration. So still a lot of room for growth, and that is the case in some of the other markets as well. For MTN, it's a similar story. What's happening outside of South Africa is really what is exciting, but also quite scary for them. We actually saw numbers from MTN Nigeria last night pointing to a very buoyant mobile telecommunications market. Of course, With MTN, you have the pressure of being so weighted outside of South Africa that when you do have political issues coming up, like the tax dispute that they currently have in Ghana and what they faced in Nigeria in the past, it makes for a pretty scary outlook, especially if you can't really predict what's going to happen there.
Speaking of scary, your assessment of SA Inc. stocks in a background of increased load shedding, especially as we hover between stage 4, 5, and even 6?
So it's definitely starting to bite, particularly when it comes to operating costs. I mean, yesterday we had Shoprite saying that they spent 560 million rand on diesel in the last 6 months, and that is a frightening number, to say the least. And I mean, even if we go back to the telecom space, we know that MTN and Vodacom are also very dependent on diesel. That will increase their operating costs as well. And the list just goes on in terms of the impact that it's having. So it's moved almost from a situation where you actually had to close your doors to, yeah, you can operate, but it's going to come at a cost. I think the shift now will be towards what can these companies do to make this to not make this an operating cost issue, an ongoing operating cost issue. So in my view, the companies that are investing heavily in their own generating capacity with, for example, solar panels, where you have a large initial capital outlay, but your running costs are quite low, would probably be in favor if I'm looking at SA Inc. specifically. But certainly, I mean, it's starting to bite. And if we are going to be at 4, 5, and 6 for the rest of the year, I think it's really going to have an impact on profitability.
Chantal, thank you so much for your time. That is Chantal Marks from F&B Wealth and Investment. And don't forget, FOMC minutes will be out, as well as that press statement in terms of the interest rate decision at 9 p.m. and followed by the conference for Jerome Powell, rather. We'll unpack all the nuances coming out of that press statement for you tomorrow. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have more news for you, so stay tuned.